What if we could redesign everything? Welcome back to the final DIF on Air session of 2018. It's been a fantastic 3 weeks. We've had over 1 million viewers and fantastic number of questions and comments. And so thank you everyone for tuning in. And here today, this afternoon, this evening, this morning, I think our speakers today, in fact, are in pretty much every single one of those parts of the day. We're going to be talking about insects for food and feed with members of the Asian Food and Feed Association. We've got speakers tuning in from Manila, from Myanmar, from Guatemala, and from Bangkok. So a real diverse conversation over the next 45 minutes. A really interesting topic, one that's surely cropping up in many of our conversations, but also throughout the course of the DIF. My name is Seb, and I'm going to be hosting for the next 45 minutes. So what I really want is to get your comments and questions through to these speakers, and I know that's exactly what they want as well. So there's a few ways you can do that. You can post in the right-hand side of the thinkdiff.co window. You can use hashtag thinkdiff on Twitter, and you can also post in the YouTube comment space. So put your questions and comments in there. It's going to be a great 45 minutes. It's been a great DIF. So let's start with Nathan. Nathan, why is this such an interesting and important subject to be discussing today?
Thank you, Seb, for the introduction. We are quite pleased to be here today and to be closing those 3 weeks of DIF sessions. So yeah, we'll be talking about insects as food and feed, especially from a Southeast Asian perspective, because we are all, even though we are now located in different parts of the world, we are all working in, very active in Southeast Asia and Asia overall, I will say. So we have here David from Myanmar from Spectrum Research Institution. We also have Josh, who is working in Cambodia and in other countries in the world from the company Micro Livestock, working on the cricket as human food value chain development. We are also pleased to have Neil from university faculty in the Philippines, researcher on insects as a circular economy tool, especially in the context of waste valorization. And briefly about myself, I was previously a consultant, and I'm now working as a coordinator of the association we are all members in, called AFFIA, for Asian Food and Feed Insect Association. And I'm starting a PhD on edible insects. So with different activities and different backgrounds, we are all working with the great tool and promising tool being insects for human food, animal feed, and much more. To maybe give you a bit of illustration of what I'm talking about, I'd like to share briefly a few slides that will help to illustrate. So we hear a lot about insects as a food for many people in the world, but this is much more than this. And many worldwide challenges are addressed now through the use of insects.
Nathan, sorry to interrupt. Would you mind just popping those slides into full screen? Just we can see them somewhat, but if you go into the present mode, I think we'll be able to see them more clearly.
That's right. I'm already in present mode, actually, so that's a little confusing.
Okay, don't worry. If you can just carry on, we'll be all right.
Right. Well, it's not going to be long on this. Just to highlight that insects are providing tools for much more than just food, and are also helping to address issues such as waste management, such as income, improvements, such as water scarcity, or such as land scarcity. Today, we very well know a few species which we are able to farm and work with, but there are much more and many more to be discovered and explored as potential tools for sustainability. Some are involved in circular economies, especially for waste management recovery, especially food waste management, but some are also used with the purpose of nutrition and sustainable food production. And as I'm showing here, we are reported about 2,111 edible insect species, and so a lot of potential behind it. Regarding the Southeast Asian perspective, I just wanted to mention that Thailand is often seen as one of the leaders in terms of edible insects, and when we are talking about insect as food, and we are especially talking about one species called cricket, with several actually subspecies declined under it, and you can already find very traditional ways of consuming them, such as frying them or including them into traditional dishes, but also processing them and including them into packaged products, as you can see in the back of the screen. And I can also mention about insect as animal feeds. I think that you had previous DIF sessions in the previous weeks about black soldier fly and animal feeds ingredient production from this insect, but also organic waste valorization through bioconversion or even soil conditioner production from this insect. Briefly about the association we are all involved in, the Asian Food and Feed Insect Association. This was started about 2 years ago, gathering today 28 members from the private sector, from the academic sector, all collaborating towards the development of the insect industry. So we are basically a platform for knowledge and collaboration. We also provide services in terms of agrotourism and education. We try to be a representative of the Asian insect industry, because even though it's a very young one, it's an industry and a growing one. And we try, as you can see, to promote it. And at the same time, we develop international collaboration, being on the trade, but also on the safety and on education overall. All right. So I'm going to let my colleagues describe further about several interests of insects from their experience in their own institution. Maybe starting with David from Myanmar, who is working on the cricket and all insects value chain description investigation. David, may I ask you to give us some more insights about the insects value chain in Myanmar, please?
Thanks very much, Nathan. So we're in a very exciting time in Myanmar at present, in that the country's emerging from 60 years of civil war and military rule, so many years of isolation. It's located in the midst of very large population areas, particularly in between China, India, Bangladesh, and Thailand as well. And this really gives us a lot of opportunities just because of the size of the population base. So occasionally you get opportunities for leapfrogging, and this doesn't happen that often, but Myanmar's sort of in the position to be doing a little bit of leapfrogging at present, and the edible insects and feed insects area is one area that can happen, we believe, and the circular economy is something that enables that. So, you know, to give an example of how rapidly some things can change. So if we talk about the mobile phone sector in Myanmar and internet sector, we've basically gone from 5% coverage to 95% coverage of the country in the space of 5 years. This is an incredible change, an incredible rate of things happening. So can this happen in the edible insect sector? Well, we think it possibly can. And if that can happen, it can be amazing. So why might that happen? Well, actually, there's a confluence of things and confluence of factors that could all act together in that. And those are, some of those might be that there's actually about 40 species of edible insects that we're aware of at present in Myanmar that people consider as edible. And from what we know, we think that there's probably as high a number as 50% of the population are already consuming insects in some form of some species. Now, that's incredibly high on an international basis. And so the thing is that the Western yuck factor that you might have, and where there's a lot of research going on to, well, how can we influence the population to consider eating insects or using insects? you just don't have to deal with it, because some people like them, some people don't like them. But it's very equally split at this point in time. Another factor is that because of the isolation period, rural incomes are very, very low. So there's high attractiveness for small-scale farming opportunities that can diversify people's income. So we think that distributed enterprise like edible insects farming is very, very attractive. Other benefits are the fact that large-scale land access is not needed, and large capital is not needed either. We already have the situation where the trading networks exist and are in place. The markets exist, are in place as well. And while it's a problem at present that almost all of the insects used are wild harvest, actually, because of the seasonality and the fact that people would like to even up their incomes, there's a very high motivation for people to move to farming, and the value chain structures are in place to take account for increased production if it's a possibility. So we think that the market can take this and can use the extra product if we can start the process of increasing production and do that via a circular economy route. So there's a number of timing factors here, and this is a little bit linked to the amount of information that the international industry knows about edible insects and the work done, and particularly things like the development of good agricultural practices in Thailand. These have been going on over the last 10 years or so, are now in place. This is very, very helpful for Myanmar to be able to learn from some of those things. Additionally,
I'm just going to ask a very quick question that's come in from the audience, which I think is really interesting. Grace is asking this question. There's that stat, I think, caught her eye, about 50% of people are already eating insects. So what she asks is, what type of people are eating insects? Are there any particular demographics within the population that I think maybe she's implying? Is it people who are poorer, perhaps, or are there any patterns there?
Seb, I'll say we don't really know yet, and so I'll say the 50% is very rough, but we know this is. We can't really divide it into ethnic groups, into socioeconomic status at present. So we don't understand it well enough, but what we know is that wealthier people will pay a lot of money for more exotic insects, whereas other people, they'll just eat everything that there is in their environment when the season's due. So there's such a diversity of insects and such a diversity of patterns of consumption. We're not really quite sure, and this is one of the reasons we're researching this. So the biggest consumption at present is of crickets, bamboo worms, giant water bugs, cicadas to some extent, and surprisingly, they're all pretty good. I hope that answers the question. So just making a few extra comments. So this is, I guess, why we need to research these sorts of things. In that, I guess we're finding it's quite staggering. You put research teams out in the field, and I would say, almost every day we're learning something new about what's happening, and this includes how insects are used in the herbal medicine sector as well. So perhaps I'll say a few extra comments on the circular economy issue. So Myanmar is very underdeveloped in the waste management sector. We see there's a lot of organic waste and a lot of potential for that to flow into some of the farming options, some of the options that can provide the feed sector support for poultry and aquaculture. And so this is where some important synergy comes from. So I guess maybe some final points. Can Myanmar do this by itself? No, it can't. And this is why we really value the association with AFFIA as the learning from areas with very similar climate in Southeast Asia in particular. So the demographics are quite similar. So we can learn a lot from the association at present. And this is a very important association for us. So maybe just to finish off, isolation's caused huge problems for Myanmar in the past, and these are evident everywhere. But every now and then, you know, the isolation provides an opportunity, and in this case, we think we've got the opportunity for a little bit of leapfrogging with a confluence of circular economy things, waste management suddenly needed as the population's burgeoning, and a lot of rapidly emerging information on the edible insect sector. So I'd love some more questions. Thank you.
Nathan, we don't hear you currently. I'm not sure if that's because you're not using your microphone or if you're muted.
Apologies for that. Do you hear me better? Right. I was telling that I would like to give the floor, like flying it over my head from Myanmar to Cambodia for the ones who didn't really locate us. So Josh, if you would like to continue to maybe deliver a bit about your experience on insect as food and especially the cricket value chain development and the impact on nutrition and your experience about it, please.
Sure, yeah. So I came into edible insects sort of from the typical Western mindset, which was insects are gross. And because I'd seen them, I'd been living in Asia and I'd seen them in like the food carts on the streets, and they fry them in sort of used vegetable oil. And just from a standpoint of someone who's always been very healthy, it didn't look super appetizing. But when I learned that crickets and other insects are actually a superfood and that they're incredibly sustainable, it was simply a mindset shift to be like, wow, I really want to incorporate this into my diet. And so over the last several years, as I've been sharing what edible insects are and can be and how they're incredibly healthy and also very sustainable, I've come to sort of realize that there's a huge demographic of people, and that the people who are the early adopters with insects, many of them are coming from a plant-based diet sort of thing, where you have people who are vegetarians or even vegans. There's a percentage of people who are open to the idea of incorporating edible insects into their diet, because in the big picture, what you have is that insects are more sustainable in a lot of ways than a lot of other options that people are looking for. So it's not necessarily the people who are, for example, eating McDonald's and that are, you know, not super healthy, the mainstream, that are going to adopt insects right now. That will come later. But right now, the early adopters are, you know, eating kale and quinoa, and they're looking for the next sort of superfood. And so while insects might be something that's very different for a Western mindset, you know, we don't grow up thinking we should be eating bugs. But for people who are looking for something that's really healthy and that's good for the planet, and that's a huge percentage of the people who are sort of embracing the new trend of plant-based foods. Something like 40% of the milks now on the shelves in the United States are plant-based. So there's like a big pushback now almost from the milk industry, because they're saying you can't call it milk because it's plant-based. But yet that's the reason for that is sustainability, along with people, you know, not wanting to have animal cruelty, but of it is for personal health and then sustain. That was what made the big difference for me. So many other people start to embrace incorporating insects. So there's also been a lot of scientific and study that's come out the last couple of years into what sort of nutritional, what the qualities are that insects have. So crickets, for example, there was a study that came out a few months ago from Valerie Stoll. that was just fascinating, because they tested eating about 25 grams of cricket powder per day, and it was like a double blind test, I think, and the results were really surprising, because they realized, wow, there's actually powerful digestive qualities that cricket powder has that we didn't really know about. So it has like prebiotic qualities, which is something a lot of people ask, well, is eating insects going to affect my digestive system? Like, how does it affect that? And what the study found, and this was one of the first of, I'm sure, many more studies to come, is that it's actually really beneficial for your digestion. And what I have found personally as well is that eating more than 25 grams, I probably eat as much as like 50 grams of insects per day. And my digestive system has been really, really good for the last couple of years. So that's just one small element of nutrition that insects can make a huge difference on. And so, if you look at other potential sources as well, that are being used. So you have, algae as a possible protein nutrition source, which is, algae is very sustainable and it's healthy, but on a mass scale, it's very difficult right now to mass produce cost effectively. Other things like lab grown meats, those are very popular for vegans, especially, and vegetarians, but just in general, people trying to get away from eating farmed meat, commercially farmed meat. Those are very sustainable, obviously, because they're grown in a lab, but they're not super healthy. So you look at some of the ingredients, they're pretty high in fat and sodium and other types of preservatives. They taste like hamburger. They have sort of that texture, and they're obviously very sustainable, but they're not super healthy. Other things like plant proteins, some of them are sustainable. They're all pretty healthy, but you have something like soy. If you're getting a large percentage of your plant protein from soy, it's not sustainable at all. I mean, soy, like 70% of soy is used for animal feed, which I think others are going to talk a little bit more about. But the 30% that's used for human consumption it's not sustainable. So when you look at sort of the competition to insects, if someone is coming at this from a standpoint of, I want to be healthy as I can be, and I want to do as much for the planet as I can, insects are an awesome solution. They're really one of the best solutions that I've come across in a very long time. And that's why I'm so passionate about it and excited to share with people about, like, I understand that it might be weird if you haven't eaten insects, because I was there just a few years ago. I thought it was something that was kind of gross, but it's a mindset change that is sort of driving this trend that, wow, it's really healthy, it's really sustainable, and they can taste really good. So I think that over the next several years, we're going to see a lot more growth in people embracing insects for those reasons, because from many different backgrounds, you're having people that are understanding why they're really such a great solution. And then in terms of the impact that it's having in the developing world, it's really cool to see that so many rural farmers are able to make a living and have additional nutrition for their families through growing crickets or other insects, depending on where they are in the world. And so that's something else that I've seen quite a few big companies are making an impact there. There's a lot of organizations that are doing good work in that area, because in the developing world, which is where the 2050, the United Nations, the report on insects talks about, we're going to have 2 billion more people. Well, the majority of those people are going to come in the developing world. And so this isn't something that's just for a Western market. That's kind of where the media coverage is coming from. But this is something that, from both an economic and a nutritional standpoint, can really benefit people in the developing world as well.
Right. Thanks a lot, Josh. That was really fascinating and motivating, I will say. So I would like, sorry, just to make a little break before switching to the next person by giving just a bit of background more about our association. We were created, as I mentioned before, in 2016, and we have now 28 members who are mostly in the 10 ASEAN countries, but also some outside members who are interested in what's going on here and are willing to potentially develop further the insects as food and feed industry. And as David and Josh mentioned, they are working on insects as food and as also a nutritious tool for rural populations. But we also have members in other countries in the region working on very different aspects of insects, but using also very different species, because among the 2,000 and much more reported edible for both animal and humans, there are many possibilities. So for the next parts, I'll be happy to let Neil from the Philippines deliver his background and experience with insects. Neil, please.
Hi, thank you very much, Josh. Good evening, everyone from the Philippines. Yeah, I'm coming from the perspective of community development, solving environmental problems in the Philippines. So about September of 2009, we had a severe super typhoon. No? It was called Typhoon Ondoy in Manila. And I saw the problems created by climate change, solid waste and pollution, and then the problem of poverty. So I can see that with insects, and we can turn things around by looking at problems as opportunities. So what opportunities do insects present in terms of reducing the problems of, say, solid waste in Manila, which is more than 60% of it is about food waste or residues. And at the same time, how can we link these problems in urban areas, the food waste in urban areas, and create opportunities on the countryside, like farmers remain poor because of the high cost of inputs, and waste, as taught by many environmental science experts, is our resources in the wrong place. So if we can use insects to create a bridge between solid waste pollution in urban areas and resource constraints in rural areas. So you have their animal feeds coming from black soldier flies, the larva. So the waste problem is addressed, and the resource problem, let's say the high cost of fertilizers in rural areas. So aside from that, the impact on animal feed production. Poor people have very low protein intake, so that creates another resource for them, not just the fertilizer, but the feed value of insects. I think we have a question here from Mona. Insect food might sound gross, but why isn't it used more directly?
No, feel free to, we can jump on the questions after you've had a chance to explain. I mean, obviously, if any of them are immediately you want to jump on them, that's fine, but I don't want to stop you mid-flow. Those are just questions that are coming through. And thank you to the audience for sending those through. Do keep posting them in that right-hand side window on the comment space or hashtag ThinkDiff, but please don't let it interrupt your flow. Yeah.
All right. Thank you, Seb. Yeah. So if I may just share, how does it relate to the circular economy? So here, we can see how insects have a role in creating opportunities for solving solid waste problems and creating opportunities for low input agriculture in the countryside, in rural areas in the Philippines. We can use so many ways coming from wet markets and also from domestic sources in urban areas, and then put this in the countryside where farmers can use them. We've done a study, a small scale study in a community which is about less than an hour from Manila, where I live, and they've used insects to create fertilizers and animal feeds. Um, and this is integrated with other technologies such as the use of beneficial microorganisms that are that support crop growth, such as in the case of corn, and also integrated with energy systems such as cook stoves and the use of biochar. So, in the context of climate change, using insects can be integrated in drawdown solutions that are being supported by or being proposed by Paul Hawken in his book Drawdown. Okay, so I think that's I think that will be all.
Great. Should we have a look at a couple of these questions? We've got about 15 minutes left. I'm sure there's some other things that you guys would like to cover, and hopefully we'll have time to do that. But this question from Mona is a really interesting one in the big picture conversation, because she says insect food might sound gross, but she doesn't understand why it isn't already used more for animal feed compared with things that like soy meal, I guess, and fish meal she's referring to, that are known to be really resource land intensive and environmentally damaging. Do any members of the panel have a viewpoint on that?
David here, I can comment on that just a little. And I guess the thing is that it's like any new technology, it's very early in the learning cycle at present. So over time, we expect the learning curve to be followed, and how fast that typical S curve is that remains to be seen. But in China at present, we understand that there's something like 65,000 tons of insects being produced for the feed sector. Now that sounds a lot, but if I talk to my friends in agriculture, they say, David, that's just peanuts. You know, I mean, you need to be talking about millions of tons. So I guess the thing is that there's a lot of learning still to be done about, well, how do you deal with vast numbers of insects? How do you deal with some of the difficulties of, for example, in our country, the concern of parliamentarians that there might be an escape or an outbreak or something like that. So there's issues of safeguards, manual handling and physical handling issues. How do you breed insects rapidly enough to deal with these things? So we'll just say, as a large scale industry where for the feed sector you're talking massive volumes, there's a lot of work still to be done.
So actually one of the potential problems is that when you're going to talk about shipping millions of tons of insects, how do you actually stop them escaping? We have another question from Sarah, and she asks, why are crickets the most popular insect for consumption? Is there a reason for that?
Maybe I can briefly start. I'll say, well, crickets are seen actually as the getaway bugs, maybe because we already had quite some knowledge about them, and farming systems about crickets have been established already much before, I'll say, the worldwide movement about insects as food, especially for the Western market, took off. Crickets have been used for pet food for quite some time already, and the complete life cycle was already known and understood. While among the 2,000 and more edible insect species reported, there are not so many which we already fully understand and which we can properly manage on the farm. So I guess that was one of the reasons, and it's also because in some part of the world it has been a very traditional food for many people, among the 2 billion people who are eating insects. So with the farming experience we had for different purpose and the consumption experience which was present in some part of the world, I guess that's some reasons that could explain why we started with crickets as one of the very interesting species. But I don't see why we wouldn't see very soon a new species coming on the market, new products from new possibilities, basically.
I can add a little something to that too. Part of it is from both a nutritional and a flavor side. Cricket easy to start with flavor, and they're also really high in protein. So this trend has sort of taken off, especially it started with protein. Obviously, crickets and other insects have minerals and other things as well, but the focus of it in the first few years here has been protein. And so crickets are as much as like 69% protein. So because of that, and because it's very easy to put into powder form and it has sort of a neutral taste, I think that's part of what has played into crickets being the gateway bug as well. But there's a lot of other insects that I think taste even better, and some of them, like cockroaches, are even higher in nutrients than crickets are, and they taste amazing still. So there's
I'm almost certain, Josh, that there are members of our audience right now that when you said cockroaches would have had some kind of reaction, but maybe that won't be the case in this time. The other question we've had in from Kirsten, which takes in a slightly different direction, is who are the key stakeholders in the world of insect food and feed? And I guess she's also kind of asking who are the drivers of change. Is it restaurants demanding it? Chefs experimenting with cooking it? Is it farmers? Is it regular people? Maybe a bit to Josh's point around regular people looking for healthy alternatives. What's driving the shift in Southeast Asia? I'm not sure if Neil might have a perspective on that, or Nathan. Nathan's turned his mic on.
Sorry, briefly. I think, and maybe it's unusual to start with it, but I will say, even though they might not be the key leaders in the change and the perception we have now about insects as food and feed, I'll say farmers are definitely the ones. They are supplying most of the food, and they account for a very little part of the population in the world, and it's the case for all kind of food. So I'll see definitely farmers as one of the key stakeholders, but then also international organization which supported very much edible insects. And we often refer to a previous conference that was actually opening people's eyes. It was back to 2013, I guess, when the FAO organized a huge conference to explain to the whole world, what's the key interest about insects, all the nutritional points, all the sustainable points. So I think, the international organizations which supported it were key stakeholders. And nowadays, there are many different kind of key stakeholders, and some of them are in AFFIA.
Well, I mean, obviously we've got members of the panel who are now living in Asia, but have experience to other regions as well. What makes this an interesting conversation to be having in Southeast Asia? And is there anything kind of mythical about the idea that insects are likely to be a food that accelerates in Southeast Asia faster than in other places of the world? Are the challenges different or significantly different? or the opportunity is greater, maybe a different way of phrasing that.
Okay.
I might.
Go ahead, David.
Go, Neil.
Sorry.
Why don't we start with Neil and then go to David? We can both have a crack at that one.
All right. I think what would drive the use of insects for feed, maybe less about feed, but rather its value as biological machinery. I'm talking about the black soldier fly larva here. So with regards to solving food residues, half of the food waste from Southeast Asia and South Asia values about close to 100 million tons per year. So reducing that by between 60 to 80% in terms of volume and creating value out of the nutrients in food residues and food waste. That would be one of the drivers, and the farmers themselves, they may have a keen interest in learning about BSF technology. They've done this in Indonesia. The Swiss Institute, AWAG. Okay, so they've tried putting it in systems, creating an example of how to valorize food waste and creating food and feed from the larva and then the fertilizers for crops. So I think farmers would definitely drive this industry forward in the years to come, as well as local governments in Asia, for example, including key cities like Hong Kong, for example, and Manila. Ordinary people, I think, in terms of the demand for safer food and more sustainable and I think regenerative. This word is becoming a household item now. The household word, no, regenerative products. So I think also in the years to come, people who will demand that food would be better for the environment, for health, and socially inclusive. I think consumers will drive that demand in the future. Thank you very much. So it's David's turn.
So I think there's two key factors in Southeast Asia or Asia in general, and the first is the population intensity, and how many people there are in a very small area. So this leads to, I guess, a shortage of land and the need to have a higher food production intensity and the ability for that. The second is a long-term cultural practice. And so just the fact that so many people, for example, Vietnam, Laos, Thailand, Myanmar, China, where the practices of eating insects have been long established, mean that it's much more likely to go ahead because some of the, I guess, the psychological barriers simply don't exist in Cambodia as well. They simply don't exist in these places, and so you don't need so much of a mind shift to have some incremental improvement and looking at, well, how can we actually systematize this in the economy? Thank you.
Any final points to make, Nathan, before we leave our audience? Anything you'd like them to take away from this conversation?
Well, first of all, thanks for attending this DIF session. We are really pleased to have participants listening to us and opening their minds about edible insects. I believe that if they attended today, it means that they are keen on tasting it very soon, and that will be great if even at least half of them is trying to have an insect in their plates next week, for example. Like, why not? There are already quite many products available, even though you might not see them on the shelves. Take a look online. I think in most part of the world there are some insect products available, and yeah, just open your mind to it, open your eyes to the potential of insects, I will say, for human food, of course, but there might also be other interesting applications in the area where you are working with insects. We have a very diverse a very big variety of members and applications and activities of AFFIA members in Southeast Asia, so I'm sure it's something that fits your interest. Yeah,
Thank
thanks.
you so much. No, thank you so much to all of our speakers. It's, of course, in 45 minutes, there's only so much we can cover, but I really appreciate the snapshot that you've given us of the picture in Southeast Asia. It certainly seems like, as a region, it's a leader in this particular topic. And you know what? You've convinced me. I'm going to try a water bug. So I don't know how many of the viewers are going to give it a go, but I'm definitely on board. This is the end of this session, and we are very, very close to the end of the DIF. At 5 p.m. GMT, we have our grand finale. We'll be looking back at some of the highlights of the last 3 weeks. We'll be chatting about what's to come. And of course, so many of the DIF sessions, almost all of the DIF sessions, in fact, including this one, are available for a period of time on the DIF site. It will be at least until the middle of January that you'll be able to watch these sessions. So continue to return to thinkdiff.co, looking through our sessions, posting your comments and feedback, asking us questions. We really appreciate those, and we really appreciate you spending your time watching the DIF. So thank you so much, and remember, you can find us on Twitter at thinkdiff_ and on Instagram at thinkdiff. So do follow us on those channels, and we hope to see you again over the coming weeks. Thank you again to our guests.